I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. Jennette McCurdy is a former child actor who most famously played the character Sam in the Nickelodeon TV show iCarly. Jennette grew up with an overbearing and manipulative mother who pushed her to be a child star. Jennette was very impressionable to her mother and believed what her mother told her was what she wanted. Jennette was led to believe that she wanted to be a child star, and with the help and persistence of her mother, she eventually landed iCarly. Jennette struggled with OCD growing up, and as she grew, she began to go through puberty. Puberty was deemed unacceptable by her mother because she would no longer be a child and unable to take child roles. Unknowingly, Jennette was subjected to problematic eating behaviors which turned into anorexia. Jennette's mother continued to manipulate Jennette, but now it was apparent that she was also abusive, forcing her to take part in destructive eating behaviors. The older Jennette got, the more she realized how twisted and narcissistic her mother was. Jennette realized she hated acting and that the only reason she had done it was because of her mother. She also found out that it was not normal to be bathed and receive vaginal and breast exams by your mother until you were 18. Once Jennette moved away from her mother, she began to indulge in binge eating because she was free to eat whatever she wanted. But this made her feel terrible, and so she purged her binges. This developed into bulimia, which would be the source of control and coping for Jennette for years. Eventually, Jennette escapes acting and her mother passes away, which creates a hole in her life, but was also the beginning of a new and freeing chapter in it. Jennette began to repair her life and take steps to address her disordered eating and lifestyle. First, we will look at Jennette's personality through the lens of the essential trait approach, with a specific emphasis on the Big 5 personality traits. The Big 5 traits are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Let's get into them. The first is openness. This refers to a person's desire for creativity, intellectual curiosity, and having varied and novel experiences. Jennette rates quite low in openness. She is very authentically sensitive, specifically with her weight and size. This is a result of her mother's manipulation of her, but has become a trait that she has and holds true. Throughout the book, Jennette lacks personal values and goals. She solely relies on others, mainly her mother, to set her goals and values. Jennette is also very lacking in a wide range of emotions. She displays a certain set of emotions that are consistent as she ages. If an emotion comes up that is uncomfortable, she tries her best to escape that emotion and go to an emotion that she knows very well. Jennette also lacks imagination and relies on others to be creative on her behalf. This trait is unclear though because she was never given the opportunity to present creativity. It would be reasonable to conclude that Jennette does indeed have creativity with the passion that she pursues later in her life, but for most of the book, she is uncreative and unimaginative. Jennette seems to lack intellect due to oversight of her mother's manipulation and the lack of originality of thoughts and ideas. Overall, Jennette lacks individuality regarding the actions and ideas she feeds into. This is likely due to her loyalty to her mother. Conscientious people are often described to be careful, diligent, organized, and responsible. These people have clear goals and are productive. Jennette scores very low on conscientiousness. Jennette is seen as very incompetent without guidance. This is a result of her dependence on her mother to tell her how to think, feel, and act. When her mother is not there to make a decision, Jennette struggles to make the right one. Both her mind and her lifestyle is disorderly and chaotic. When Jennette finally moves out of the home and leaves her mother behind, she is lost and makes many bad decisions and her life falls into shambles. She begins to become irresponsible and unproductive and relies on eating disorders to cope. She also lacks self-discipline because as soon as her mom is not there, she breaks their strict eating schedule and ends up binge eating. Unfortunately, this binge eating leads her to develop bulimia. One trait that sways the needle slightly towards a high level of conscientiousness is her dutifulness. This trait is cut short because Jennette is only dutiful to her mother and her mother's wishes. Jennette's level of extroversion is complicated. Extroversion broadly can be defined as a person's inclination towards sociability, assertiveness, high energy, and desire for social activity. These people strive for social interaction and engage in it in a positive and enthusiastic way. At the beginning of the autobiography, she seems to be outgoing and sociable, but we soon find out that Jennette is shy and struggles to maintain calm and comfortable in the spotlight. She appears to be extroverted, especially considering she is an actress and relatively famous. This does not seem to be reflective of her internal state because she gets very anxious when the attention is on her. Jennette has low energy, and it seems like any effort she puts in is to appease her mother or because she is acting. Jennette does not have any ambition either. She wishes she was normal and had not been a child star. This causes her to be cold and resentful near the end of the book. As the autobiography progresses, we see a tone change. Jennette, as a young child, is enthusiastic and positive. Jennette has low energy, and it seems like any effort she puts in is to appease her mother or because she is acting. Jennette does not have ambition either. She wishes she was normal and had not been a child star. This causes her to be cold and resentful near the end of the book. As the autobiography progresses, we see a tone change. Jennette, as a young child, is very enthusiastic and positive, but by the end, Jennette is plagued with negativity and numbness. Jennette was very assertive and demanding as a child. She had high expectations of people and brought her energy everywhere she went. But that assertiveness was lost when she became more popular as a child actor. Although that assertiveness is lost in her early life, it seems as though some of it has come back by the end of the book. People high in agreeableness are in fact agreeable. They are typically cooperative, empathetic, and friendly. These people tend to strive for harmony and avoid conflict. Jennette's level of agreeableness seems quite high, especially with her mother. She displays trust, compliance, respect, politeness, and compassion. But this is an illusion. This is a tactic to survive. In reality, Jennette is selfish and lacks sympathy, and for good reason. All her life she had been agreeable. This made her easy to push around and manipulate. It was the only way to survive in the acting industry and having a mother like hers. She was always expected to follow exactly where people told her, and she was forced to comply to survive. Over time, this became exhausting and unbearable, and by then she was an adult. She had lost most of her sympathy and altruism because she had been abused and broken. It is hard to get exact ratings of her agreeableness, but at the end of her autobiography, it had dropped to a level lower than in her youth. And finally, we have neuroticism. This describes the degree in which an individual experiences negative emotions such as anxiety. People high in this may experience stress and negative emotions more easily. Jennette's level of neuroticism is very high. She has high anxiety, which contributes to depression, self-consciousness, impulsivity, and emotional volatility. These combined make her somewhat of a hostile and withdrawn person who is extremely susceptible to stress. Much of this can be attributed to her mother and what she taught Jennette. Her mother was also very anxious and unstable. She put her own mental instability onto Jennette and made Jennette think that the world was out to get her. Her mom placed a heavy emphasis on Jennette's appearance and contributed to her various eating disorders and self-image issues. Overall, much of Jennette's neurotic impulses stem from the teachings of her mother. This neuroticism is not easily managed and results in many downfalls in her life. These downfalls result in Jennette becoming very depressed and unhappy. Next, we will look at the psychoanalytic approach, focusing on Freud's defense mechanisms. The first defense mechanism we will explore is denial. Denial involves refusing to believe bad news or knowledge that may cause anxiety. Denial is a prominent theme in the book, and we see Jennette's slow realization that her mother is an abusive and manipulative person. Denial of her reality was something that Jennette did for her mother over and over again. She convinced herself and others that what her mother put her through was what she wanted. This was far from the truth, but Jennette held this belief because it was easier to deny her reality than to face the truth, that her mother was not a good person and was acting out of self-interest. At times, Jennette would peek underneath the surface and catch a glimpse of her mother's true nature, making readers think that she was going to make a breakthrough and escape. But each time, she retreated and denied what she saw and put her mother on a pedestal. She believed that her mother knew everything and ignored the destruction she left behind. It was only when her mother died did she realize that her mother was an abusive and harmful person. Reaction formation is when someone does or says something that is opposite of their own actions or thoughts. Jennette coped by forming the reaction of eating disorders. Instead of giving in to her desire to eat, she performed the opposite, which was starvation and purging. These eating disorders were a continued struggle throughout the book, and even in the end, she had not fully repaired that problem. These eating disorders served as a way to cope with stress, pressure, and adversity she faced. When she was in a situation where she felt helpless, overwhelmed, self-conscious, or inadequate, she would engage in these negative behaviors to provide a release and to comfort her. They were also used as a way of gaining power and feeling in control. These behaviors made her feel better about herself and would ease her in difficult situations. Rationalization was another major problem for Jennette. Rationalization allows a person to come up with a reasonable explanation for doing something without acknowledging the truth. Even though Jennette knew that her eating disorders and problematic relationships were detrimental to her, she still excused them using her own twisted logics and rationality. By rationalizing these negative aspects of her life, she diffused herself of the responsibility that she had to solve them. She also justified them and made them seem necessary and reasonable. Intellectualization makes anxiety-provoking thoughts into concepts that lack emotion and ease the anxiety. Throughout the book, the tone is very cold and blatant. There is very little shift in the mood of the book aside from the personality shift that Jennette undergoes. Jennette uses intellectualization as a coping mechanism for telling her story. She tells the story with a lack of emotion, especially when you hear Jennette read it out loud. The whole book is spoken in a near monotone voice, which highlights the numbness that she is experiencing while telling the story. Even the parts of the book that are emotionally sensitive, they are read in a cold and matter-of-fact way. Repression involves failing to acknowledge things that remind the person of unwanted thoughts or feelings. This appears multiple times throughout the book, most notably with her therapist. Jennette tries to fix her eating disorder by going to a mental health specialist once she is an adult. She develops a trusting relationship with her therapist who treats her very well and cares about her and her growth. When her therapist questions Jennette about her past, Jennette immediately feels threatened and leaves her session and resorts to her bulimic behavior to cope. The therapist wanted to get to know her past and noticed that Jennette had alluded to the possibility that her mother was abusive towards her, and Jennette may have been manipulated by her mother in a deeply unhealthy way. Unfortunately, Jennette did not want to face this reality and fled, only leaving the therapist a message saying, "Thank you, but I cannot continue." The final defense mechanism that Jennette used was sublimation, specifically through humor. Sublimation provides a safe outlet for otherwise problematic or inappropriate desires. Throughout the book, Jennette uses a lot of dark humor that can be seen as both funny, but also saddening and disheartening. Jennette likely uses humor in the book to avoid facing her trauma head-on. That way she could convey her story to people, but in a roundabout way where she could avoid the full reality of it. The use of humor by Jennette is effective for her because it helps her to present this traumatic story of her past without hurting her so much. Jennette makes it clear that she has a deep hate for her past and the trauma that she endured, and wants nothing but to scream and cry and curse her mom, but instead uses dark humor to convey her story in a more appropriate and self-protecting way. Next, we will go over the phenomenological approach. We will look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Rogers' fully functioning person. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. Jennette has all her basic physiological needs taken care of. She has adequate food, water, and shelter. There's nothing significant that Jennette is lacking in, and does not struggle with this for the entirety of the book. Jennette meets almost all of the requirements for safety, security, comfort, and sex. She has access to safety and security both from her environment and from the people around her. The area up for question is Jennette's comfort. Jennette is not always comfortable. In fact, she experiences a lot of discomfort in her acting roles and with her body image. Although she is not comfortable in her acting and in her self-image, she is comfortable at home and in general. Sex does not apply because she is not concerned about it and does not discuss that aspect of her life very often. Overall, Jennette meets the criteria for this level with the exception of moderate discomfort in some aspects of her life. Belonging and social activity is where things start to get complicated. At a young age, Jennette felt as though she belonged, and being the favorite child of her mother's, she felt secure and stable in her relationships. This changed when she grew up and felt alienated because she always followed her mother and did what she wanted to do. Jennette had a hard time developing relationships because she was always on the road and was going from one acting role to the next. Jennette always had access to social activities, but because she moved around all the time, it was difficult to stay involved. This caused loneliness and isolation. Both these aspects worsened as she grew up. The older she got, the more she realized her mother's negative tendencies, which caused Jennette to rebel and make bad decisions. This partially broke her sense of belonging with her mother. Her social life continued to diminish as she got older and older, because she would be distanced from her friends as a result of natural life progression and the mental health challenges she faced. Overall, Jennette fails this section of the hierarchy. This section seems like an easy pass for someone with a public face and fame. Most people would presume that an actor has high self-esteem and has high status, but that is untrue for Jennette. From an early age, Jennette had been given high status by her mother. Her mother favored Jennette over her other siblings, which gave Jennette special privileges. Although Jennette felt she had high status, she was still a pawn of her mother's. Once she got established in acting, Jennette had little power and say over what she had to do in her roles. Many managers and producers pushed her around and made her do things that she did not want to partake in. In her whole acting career, she never held the power and always had someone dictate what happened to her. She may have held the status over fans, but these were not something that she emphasized. Jennette also had low self-esteem. She struggled severely with self-image issues as a result of her mother's continuous monitoring of her dieting habits and the criticism of her body. Jennette does not pass this level. Jennette clearly does not meet or exceed the requirements to achieve self-actualization. Jennette has much improvement to do in the other levels to make it to this one. Even if Jennette made it to this level, she does not believe in herself or her potential. She is too self-destructive or does not hold high enough regard for herself or her future. Now, let's look at Roger's fully functioning person. Roger describes a fully functioning person as someone who lives an authentic experience and is happy. This means that a fully functioning person faces the world without fear, self-doubt, or neurotic defenses. Rogers believed that this was only obtainable through unconditional positive regard, although Maslow disagreed. Throughout the autobiography, Jennette experiences fleeting occurrences of happiness, but these did not last a substantial amount of time. The older she got, the less happy she was, and the less enthusiastic she had become. Jennette also displayed a concerning amount of neurotic tendencies. This includes her high anxiety levels, eating disorders, and her terrible self-image. All of these things disqualify her from being labeled a fully functioning person by Rogers. Another important criteria for a fully functioning person is unconditional positive regard. Unfortunately, nobody gave Jennette this, including her mom. Jennette's mom's positive regard was deeply conditional from the beginning. This started with Jennette needing to land roles for positive regard, then progressed to needing to have a certain body physique to receive positive regard. Even on her mother's deathbed, she was concerned about how fat Jennette had gotten and criticized her looks. Jennette clearly did not fit the criteria for a fully functioning person, resulting in conditions of worth. Conditions of worth are ideas that we are only good and valuable if we fulfill a certain criteria. Many of these conditions of worth all stem from her mother's selfishness and manipulation. Jennette was not given unconditional worth, but rather she had to earn it by maintaining a particular body physique, dieting to sustain her current body, adhering to her mother's wishes and desires, and acting, because that is all that she had ever known and was the primary reason for having all the other conditions. Unfortunately for Jennette, these conditions are deeply ingrained into her personality and cognitive processes and continue even after the death of her mother. The final outcome. Jennette loses her mother towards the end of the book, which sparks an opportunity for repair. She is finally able to live for herself and try to achieve some sort of self-actualization. She has quit acting and is making efforts towards recovering from her eating disorders and reforming her life. She is currently a writer and is finally taking control of her life. Overall, my findings and the concepts I found were fitting. They emphasized her personality traits, the defense mechanisms that she relies on, and looks at how her position on Maslow's hierarchy explains some of her tendencies. Jennette will likely continue to have a similar personality to the one that she has had for most of her life, but she is recognizing some of the aspects and traits that are a downfall to her and implementing change. Overall, her future looks brighter and more fulfilling.